Hi everyone, it's Stiofán MacAmhalghaidh here again. Talking to you this time about meltdowns and shutdowns for Neuro Pride Ireland 2021. Meltdowns and shutdowns. Not a very fun subject, really. So, here's the question: what is a meltdown? What is a shutdown? What's the difference? How can you be supportive of somebody who's experiencing one or other? Meltdown is all about overload. That's really what it comes down to. When we get overloaded by our senses, what we experience, by emotions, which quite often can be driven by what our senses are delivering to us, but can be stuff coming from in here as well. And our distressing thoughts and memories and things like that. It can become too much, and our sense of control gets lost. And that's essentially what results in a meltdown. It's that sense of losing control over what's happening. Um, and the question is, how does this happen? How does this come about? How does somebody get into that state? I suppose. Being subject to intense sensory experiences, I think this is something that people generally have an understanding of. That, like, if your environment is attacking you essentially through your senses, it can be deeply distressing. But also other things can play into this and can be the only cause potentially. Things like being excluded, being invalidated, being ignored, having your needs dismissed. And again, this can tie into things like having past experience of trauma, or it could be a multitude of things. I mean, it could be kind of a not particularly pleasant environment where somebody has 3 or 4 times dismissed or ignored your needs and you signaling your needs. And that tying in with past experiences and memories that you have coming together and becoming too much to handle, basically telling you you don't have control of this situation. You don't have control of the things that you need to have control of here in order to sort of like have an you know a good day. As simple as that. It's, that you're actually being sort of undermined by circumstances, really. And this is something that does happen to all humans. It's why we use the word meltdown, because it was a word that was already there. It was this description of somebody basically sort of like losing it. And usually that kind of gets associated with people kind of like getting over emotional, kind of not having a sense of self control and kind of throwing a tantrum kind of thing. The word tantrum does get involved here, but it's very different kind of circumstances. But we use the word meltdown, um, and it is something that all people can experience when you get pushed to overload. So I mean, if people are kind of being obnoxious and antagonistic, or dismissive, if your experiences are consistently unpleasant, it can become too much. It's as simple as that. And it becomes impossible then to function. Um, and that's really the point where a meltdown comes about, where, and you can often you can feel it happening, it's there and there's nothing you can do to stop this. Basically you feel, okay, I don't have control of this situation anymore. I am not able to function in an effective way right now, and you go into a state of crisis, basically. And unfortunately, for autistic people, very often for environmental reasons and for sort of social interaction reasons, being that close to overload is actually kind of like a normal experience. That's kind of like the everyday. It's like you got to hit 100 to go into meltdown. Most people are kind of at 40, 50, 60. An awful lot of autistic people live their lives at 95, and it doesn't take much to go and push you beyond the limit. And as a result of that, you unsurprisingly will see that autistic people are more likely to have a meltdown than most other people. Don't want to get into this too much. Don't like talking about it, but I'm going to have to. The actual experience itself is horrible. Is the only word for it. It is horrible. It is distressing. It's embarrassing. It's disorienting. You feel ashamed, like you've lost control. I mean, basically all of your senses just become like this chaotic noise. People have used different phrases for it. I could describe it there as being like being caught in a riptide or in a sandstorm. It's that sense of losing your grip, losing contact with the ground, having the feet pulled from under you, being caught up in a whirlwind. You've lost that sense of control over your own choices in your own life, and everything just becomes this chaotic whirl, and it's half the time you aren't even aware of what's happening around you, and people will tell you things about it afterwards and you have no memory of it. But it's a horrendous, distressing experience. Okay, what is a shutdown? Shutdown is not the same thing, but it can be linked or related. One of the common situations that causes a shutdown is as kind of a fallout from having a meltdown, because that is utterly emotionally, psychologically draining, and essentially your body and your mind is basically just said no, and you cease to operate. Okay, there's no kind of like wild emotional displays or anything like that. It's just, I mean, people have associated with kind of a catatonic state, and I've mentioned that there is one of the options. It can be like a catatonic state, which comes about from trying to suppress a meltdown, because it's considered to be socially unacceptable to have a meltdown. And it's also a way that people can dissociate in order to prevent meltdowns. So they basically go into a kind of shutdown state on an ongoing basis, simply because by separating emotionally from their own experiences, they can stop themselves from actually repeatedly going into meltdowns. So there's a variety of different ways they can arise, but essentially it comes down to the same thing. And this is important. Neither is a bad behavior. In fact, if anything, they're both a good thing to happen because they were necessary at the moment. They're both strategies. They're kind of things that your body and your mind has chosen to do because it needs to. Okay, this is a strategic move. Really, it's about survival. It's about survival of the self, the individual and your sense of being. Meltdowns result in a reboot, and I think that's kind of a really kind of evocative phrase, because people have asked sort of, is a meltdown a reboot? It's not. It's, if you like, everything kind of being kind of like pushed off the desk onto the floor, because it got too chaotic. It's basically the system crash that requires the reboot. And shutdown is more like kind of powering off, or going into standby mode, if you like, in order to protect yourself from further harm. One person I've seen to describe it as being kind of like putting yourself into safe mode, because you've got a virus infection on your computer. So it's think of it in those kind of terms. This is kind of like an emergency response to a crisis situation, and I think that kind of like captures what's going on. But basically, both of them are just attempts to survive. Okay, they're about protecting yourself from further harm, and they're about trying to make a little bit of space for you to heal from the harm you've already experienced and try and recover just to be able to function again. Unfortunately, that circumstances don't always make that easy. So what can you do to support somebody if they're having a meltdown or a shutdown, particularly a meltdown? Patience and compassion are really, really important. It takes time and it takes support. And by being patient, you give the person space and time that they need to deal with it themselves. And compassion is really important because it isn't a bad thing that they've done. This is actually self-preservation. This is about survival. So being compassionate for the fact that the person is in a crisis state and needs that patience is really, really important as a first step. Don't go judging, don't go criticizing, don't go trying to impose, don't go asking what's happening or what can they do. When you just give them the space, they can deal with this. Give them the time and space to heal. That's really important because, they've been harmed and they need to actually get that recovery and they need to feel that they can do it themselves. A lot of the time, it's important to be able to do that. And if you want to kind of like help in a kind of like a more general sense, wait until afterwards to ask, what is it that harms this person? What is the triggers this kind of thing? What initiates this? And what can you do to support them? Very often people are pretty clear what's causing things, but it can be very difficult to explain and express that without a little bit of time and patience. So it's very often worthwhile to say, I'd like to help you. Make sure this doesn't happen to you again. Let me know what I can do. Not now, but come to me when you're ready and tell me what I can do to help. That gives them back the kind of control and autonomy over events that is exactly what they've lost. And it's a useful first step in giving them a sense that they can take back control of this. That's it. Short and sweet. Hope you enjoyed that. Thank you.